Okie dokie. Sorry about the delay there, but hey, it's live stuff, and I needed to plug the proper microphone back in. So anyway, welcome to Adam's Music Box. It's the Saturday stream, and normally we like to keep it fun on this channel. But today is going to be quite a solemn exploration of ancient music and the perilous state of its survival in the present day due to events unfolding in real time. So today I want to focus on the liturgical music of the Syriac Orthodox Church, one of the most ancient churches in the world, whose language, whose liturgy, whose customs, and whose people date back to the time of Christ. Now, the Syriac Orthodox Church has its main parishes in the country of Syria, the modern country of Syria, which is one with very ancient roots. Now, the Syriac rather Orthodox Church is unique in that their liturgy is chanted in the language that was spoken by Jesus Christ. His lingua franca and those of the apostles was Aramaic. And the Syriac language is generally described as a dialect of Aramaic that is virtually indistinguishable from the language that Christ would have spoken among his apostles. Now, questions of musical authenticity, whether we're talking about spiritual or secular music, always pose difficulty when we're trying to find out what music sounded like in an era not only long before recorded sound, long before self playing instruments, and even long before musical notation as we understand it today. Most of these ancient musical traditions, whether the folkish traditions that would have been sung in tavernas or in agoras, or whether the liturgical music that would have been chanted as part of a holy divine liturgy, most of it was passed on through the mouth, through the ear. It was an oral tradition, much like ancient poetry. Generations and generations and generations of people learned this art form, this holy art form, not necessarily by studying the written notation, but by learning from their elders, learning from those in prior generations. And this ancient tradition has survived for thousands of years because of it. And since then, people have written it down. People have, in the contemporary age, obviously recorded it. But what's so striking to me is that while in the popular music world, styles change, sometimes yearly, sometimes monthly, technology changes, sometimes every 10 years, sometimes every 5 years. I mean, a new iPhone comes out, new methods of recording come out. Going back to the analog days of the 20th century, we had shellac disc that gave way to magnetic tape, and then you had monomagnetic sound that gave way to stereo, that gave way to multi-track. But all of that is just less than a drop of water in the ocean in terms of time span compared to the ancient nature of these chants. Now, when listening to these ancient chants, you'll immediately be struck by something that sounds very different than virtually all other music that we've heard for the last 1,000 years, whether it's Western Christian liturgical music, whether it's European classical music, whether it's European or American folk music, or whether it's contemporary pop music. And there's a very distinct reason that when we hear this chanting from the divine liturgies of the Syriac Orthodox Church, why it strikes us as different. And this is because of its lack of what we would now refer to as harmony or polyphony. The chanting is all done in a monophonic tone, which means that there is only essentially, and I'm simplifying it so that we can all understand it. So pardon some of the expressions, but a monophonic music is where there is only a single melody line as opposed to one that is layered. Harmony is, in essence, the layering of tones, and as we get increasingly sophisticated in terms of musical development, it's something where we have differing melody lines that are all layered on top of each other. Think of it in architecture like a skyscraper. Harmony is a skyscraper, and the more floors that are on it, the more complex the harmony is. Something that is monophonic in terms of harmony is just a one level building, a ground level building. And while in theory, this doesn't seem as though it would sound extremely different from the stuff that modern ears in places like Europe and America are used to, and frankly, the entire world, it does strike us as very different. When we hear music that sounds ancient, that is generally what people mean. And to give you sort of the perfect real life example, if someone went to a modern day session musician and said, I want to hear music that sounds ancient. A good composer would write something modeled after this ancient Syriac music that is completely monotonal. Now, what's striking about this is that if you were to go into a Syriac church today, you would hear the chanting performed just about exactly as it was in the first century AD. So, this music is really our modern gateway into the world of Jesus Christ and what both the holy music and the folkish music would have sounded like when Jesus walked the earth. Now, this is very profound. It's profound for spiritual reasons, for historical reasons, for musicological reasons, and just from the point of view of enjoying music. And when I use the word music, I'm not inferring instrumental music. We're talking about vocal music. And just to clarify some of the terminology even more, I'm not referring to music as a form of entertainment or even a form of art, because in my world, art and entertainment are relatively interchangeable terms. I'm referring to it as a spiritual expression done in a vocal musical idiom. I think that's probably the most accurate and the most respectful way to describe this to what we might call a lay or a secular audience, since we on this channel talk about all sorts of music, typically about pop or classical music. Now, the ancient monophonic chants of the church, the Syriac Orthodox Church in particular, that doesn't imply that there's only one voice that is singing the chant, that is chanting the chant. It can be in some churches, especially smaller ones, there might well be only one man doing the chant as the priest performs the liturgy. But in the larger churches and the cathedrals, it's not uncommon to hear a large choir of men, because it's typically men in this tradition, who are all singing this singular monophonic line. Now, this itself creates a unique sound, particularly to modern ears. For those who grew up in a Syriac tradition, it wouldn't necessarily sound different because they have been practicing this form of worship for thousands of years, literally dating back to the ancient church, to the time of Christ. But today, if you're not Syriac and haven't really encountered this music, other than maybe distillations of it used for library music or film or TV music, it would strike you as something very different. Because one of the most beautiful things that you'll hear when you hear a choir singing in this monophonic style is that you'll recognize that the distinct timbre and texture of each man's voice is actually more pronounced when you're not including harmony. Because when you're all doing something in unison, when it is all mono, the only thing to differentiate one voice from another are the unique characteristics, the unique God given biological characteristics of each man producing the sound. And this, in and of itself, creates a very unique and a very beautiful, and I would say a deeply holy and deeply moving experience. Now, some might be asking, well, how is ancient Syriac chanting in a liturgical setting different than Greek Orthodox chanting in what we traditionally in the English language refer to as the Byzantine style? Well, the short answer is they are extremely similar. The main difference is in a Greek as opposed to a Syrian group of chanters, there is usually something called a drone, which is a continuous type of underscore that provides, if you will, a sonic base underneath which the chanting takes place. And in the Syriac tradition, that doesn't exist. So it's even more raw in that sense than the Greek tradition, which came about more or less at the same time, but in slightly different locations. But the reason that the Syriac tradition sounds even more ancient is because the language of Aramaic isn't related to any of the Indo-European languages, where Greece is the most important of the Indo-European languages that has led to the creation of Latin and the Romance languages and the Teutonic Germanic languages, including English, and just about all of the languages in Europe. Hungarian and Estonian and Finnish are kind of their own thing, but for the most part, it was these Indo-European languages that influenced all of these languages that we speak today in the so-called Western world, and the sounds that we are familiar with all trace its roots to ancient Indo-European. Aramaic doesn't trace its roots to that. Ancient Aramaic is a Semitic language, and there are many Semitic languages spoken commonly today. The most widespread in terms of numbers is Arabic, a much more modern language than Aramaic. Now, in these churches, the Aramaic sounds more ancient because, to describe it in a musical term, a lot of the consonant sounds are much more staccato than we would hear in Greek. In Greek, even contrasted with many other European languages that have borrowed from or even derived from Greek, Greek has quite soft consonant sounds, which is what makes it a very easy language to sing in. Italian, which is derived from Latin, and Latin, which was derived from Greek, you could also say has softer consonant sounds, which makes it a rather attractive language to sing. The Semitic languages, like Aramaic, have a much rougher sound, which, because of their unfamiliarity to sort of American and European ears, it makes it sound even that much more ancient. Because, you know, the expression, the past is a different country, they do things differently there. Now, I definitely recommend that you listen to some of this music, and the best bet is to go to YouTube and just type in Syriac Orthodox Church Divine Liturgy. A divine liturgy in all of the Orthodox traditions, whether Eastern Orthodox or Oriental Orthodox, this refers to the liturgical ceremony, what in the Roman Catholic Church and many other Western Christian churches is known as the Mass, because here you can really immerse yourself in the fact that what we would identify as modern people, what we would identify as music, is omnipresent throughout the service, throughout the divine liturgy, even though in Orthodox churches, whether Eastern or Oriental, there is no instrumental music. Everything is sung, everything is produced by the human voice. It was considered not necessarily sacrilege, but just prohibited because the voice was something directly created by God. And yes, instruments, which are created by men who are created by God, there is that link. And I think that all forms of creativity definitely have a spiritual connection. But the only instrument that one could argue is literally handmade by God is the human voice. And that's why in these ancient churches, you are not going to find organs, you're not going to find any other instruments. Now, a question that might arise is, well, why is it that if you go into, let's say, a Roman Catholic church, a Protestant church, an Anglican Episcopalian church, you hear music with harmony? If you go into a Southern Baptist church, you'll hear gospel music with all sorts of very modern harmonies. So, what's the deal? What happens? Some might ask. Well, certain churches decided to change their liturgical music while others kept theirs relatively the same. The biggest change began to happen in Western Europe, primarily France, but other places too, in around the 10th century. This was the time when the Gregorian chants of the Roman Catholic Church, which were monophonic, much like the chanting in the Greek Orthodox tradition and churches that developed from Greek Orthodoxy, and in the and in the Syriac Orthodox Church, it was around this 10th century period when that started to diverge in the Roman Catholic parts of Europe and other parts of the world, although at that time it was pretty much Europe. And what happened then is the monks who created these chants began to incorporate polyphony. So this was the birth, if you will, in the liturgical setting of modern harmony. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the very early church organs also began to appear around the 10th century and became much more common over the next 300 to 400 years. It didn't happen all at once. There was no sort of a papal bull that said, right, we're going to sing in harmony in the Roman Catholic Church and we're going to have the organ in our churches. It was instead a much more gradual and organic thing. And because all of music from the time of, the time that Emperor Constantine made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire, or gave it, formal status. I don't want to get too into the historic weeds. But ever since then, up to really kind of the 18th and really the 19th century, it was churches, Christian churches, that really led the way in musical development in Europe, and the societies like the United States descended from ancient European and Levantine cultures. Because in the sense of Christianity, we can say that the Levant and Europe have much in common, although we can see just by examining the music alone where some of the things begin to diverge between the Eastern Mediterranean, Western Mediterranean, Northern Europe, and the Levant. And for those who might not be familiar with the term, the Levant is the eastern landmass on the Mediterranean. So the places in the ancient Syria, ancient Lebanon, ancient Palestine, all of these places in the Eastern Mediterranean. Some people consider Cyprus Levantine. Culturally, it's really Southern European, Hellenic Southern European, but that's what we mean when we talk about the ancient Levant, that part of the world. So where was I? The organ and polyphony. So if you were to go into a church, forget today. Let's say that the year is 1802 for whatever reason. You go into the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. You are going to hear lush organ sounds and polyphony, which became ever more lush and ever more polyphonous over the centuries, beginning in the Middle Ages, beginning in around the 10th century. By contrast, if you were to go into a cathedral in Athens at that time, Athens was occupied at the time, but let's say in 1830, when it was no longer occupied, if you were to go into Athens and go into a cathedral, you would hear a large male chanting choir. There would be that drone, and there would be the monophonic chanting. If you were in that same year to go to Aleppo, or if even 50 years ago you were to go to the Syrian city of Aleppo and go into a Syriac Orthodox church, you would hear this chanting without any drone. So whether it was one man, 15, or even 20 in maybe one of the larger cathedrals, it would be this ancient sound without the harmony, which kind of serves as a glue. And because there is no polyphony, the monophonic style almost seems a lot less structured to the ear. It seems freer in a way. And what this means is that the rhythmic elements are very different than in harmony, than in polyphony, to be more specific, because the more polyphonous music gets, the more the melody has to guide the rhythm. I said a long time ago that one of the biggest differences, a few months ago on this channel, that one of the biggest differences between European classical music and classical traditions outside of Europe is that in European classical music, when performed correctly, it's the harmony and the melody which guide the rhythm, which define the rhythm, which tell the rhythm where to go. In most other ancient styles of music or classical styles of music. It is the rhythm that tends to guide the melody and harmony. And I think that if we were really to define where that divergence began, it was when Western churches, primarily the Roman Catholic Church, Protestantism came later, when the Roman Catholic Church evolved or changed, whatever word you want to use, into polyphony. That's when the modern notion of harmony and melody guiding the rhythm set took hold in Europe, where in places like the southern Mediterranean, which geographically are Europe, but liturgically are their own tradition, the Hellenic Orthodox Byzantine tradition. That's when this divergence happened. And weirdly, the time of the Great Schism was kind of, sort of, around the time that polyphony happened in the West. The polyphony came first, but you can see how this divergence happened. So when you have a purely monophonic style of chanting, the way that you have in the Syriac, pardon me, it's a lot of terminology here, in the Syriac Orthodox Church, you tend to experience as a listener a lot more freedom in the rhythm. There's no need for a pulse the way that you would have, let's say, in ancient African classical music or an Indian raga, but at the same time there is no melody or harmony shaping the music the way that you would hear in a great performance of European classical music led by one of the true pioneers, or the true exponents, I should say, of European classical music, someone like Furtwängler or Mengelberg conducting Beethoven, Brahms, or Wagner, where the harmony and melody is guiding the music. What you have is something else. It's not this melodious guiding of the rhythm the way you would have in a Beethoven symphony, nor is it something where the pulse is essential, the way it is in West African drumming or an Indian raga. What you have instead is something where the actual texture of the tone, the various psychological and emotional expressions of the individual chanter, and dare I say, their relationship with the holy, which is guiding the rhythm. And because of that, it's also musically fair to say that the freest rhythm that you'll experience in any music is in these ancient chants, whether it's the Syriac or the similar but different Greek. And that's why I really encourage you to listen to this, because while you aren't programmed to think of rhythm when there's no conductor setting it or drummer creating it, the rhythm is the key. The rhythm, though, is moving so freely that those accustomed to conducted music or to pulsating music might not instinctively define it as rhythm, but the rhythm is there, and it's incredibly sophisticated, incredibly poetic, and incredibly free. Again, go to YouTube and Google Syriac Orthodox liturgy. Um, Click on as many as possible. You might see some from large churches and from small churches, and then you can do the same with Greek, and you can see what the similarities are, or hear, and you can see and hear what some of the differences are. Now, why am I doing this stream today? Well, it's a stream that I suppose is for all seasons, so to speak, but right now the Syriac Orthodox Christians in their indigenous land of modern Syria are being threatened with extermination. There is an attack on them, an armed attack on them going on, and it's incredibly harrowing and sad to watch. Entire families destroyed in their own homes, children screaming, run over with cars, with armored vehicles. It's really one of the most horrifying things I think I've ever seen. And it's not just the Syriac Christians who are under attack. Greek Orthodox Christians are under attack. Maronite Christians are under attack. Assyrian Christians, Chaldean Christians, so many different Christian communities, of which there are many, although shrinking in size because they're being killed and driven out. They're all under attack, as are Alawites, an ancient people that are in, they're a sect of Islam, and they are also being killed right now in Syria, particularly in the western parts, the coastal parts of the countries. While this isn't a news program, it's a music program. It got me thinking that musical styles, just like languages and other folk cultural traditions, they can go extinct because when the survival of any cultural tradition, spiritual or otherwise, is predicated and is sustained by being passed down orally and familiarly and visually as opposed to academically, it really relies on a living tradition to to make sure that not only it carries on, but that it carries on in the authentic way. I mean, although all churches have changed over the years, some consciously, like the Roman Catholic, when polyphony and organ was brought in, and some unconsciously, like the Assyrian Church, which has encountered many different cultures, some hostile and some friendly. I would say that it is one of the closest links we modern men and women have to the way that worship sounded in the age of, or more appropriately, shortly after the age of Christ on earth, the period of the first century AD. And yes, we have the recordings. Yes, there are Syriac people living in the US and Canada and elsewhere, places where they aren't being killed and blown up and run over by tanks. But it's I think something is definitely lost when a tradition isn't allowed to physically live on in the place in which it is indigenous, because some of these churches that the Syriac people worship in are are centuries old, and many of them have been lost during the wars of the last sort of 15 years in the Levant. But the ones that aren't lost, now the danger is the people will be made extinct or driven out of their homes. And so, as a music channel, from my point of view, even if you're so callous that you don't care about the people, and I think most people watching this will care about the people, you should at least care about these ancient traditions that are very much alive, because a church isn't a museum, a church isn't a record store, a church is a living, breathing house of God, and the people in it come together to perform a liturgical ceremony that connects them to God. And you cannot replace that with anything. You can learn about it through YouTube and through Spotify and through recordings and video. And that's what I'm encouraging you, the listener of this stream, to do. Definitely go out and learn about it. But there's no substitution for the original thing. And while many things come and go over time, and while things turn back to the dust from whence they came, when it's the wicked hand of man doing this to other men and women, that's when it's truly demonic and a true tragedy. So if anyone listening here has any influence in the world, say something about what's going on, because people are being killed and their beautiful traditions are being killed with them. And while the recordings live on, there is, like I said, no substitute for the real thing. So, like I said, a bit of a solemn stream today. We'll be back to fun and games and all that crap tomorrow. But until then, try to listen and learn about this chanting, because if you've never heard it before, it will definitely be something that will feel very unique and hopefully compelling. We will see you next time. Take care.